Okay, welcome everyone. Beruchim habayim. Thank you all for joining us tonight, today, wherever you may be. A couple of announcements before we begin today's very exciting shiur. Our new membership curriculum will be released in a few weeks' time, so make sure to stay tuned for launch. Secondly, we are very pleased to say we are working with Sefaria to get more classical Sephardic works onto their already amazing platform. Chacham Ben Amozeg's Em LaMikra was recently added, and we're getting other works added there soon, hopefully. So very pleased about that. Focusing on tonight, I think it's always a huge pleasure to have Rabbi Yitzhak Berdugo give us a shiur. He needs really no introduction. He is such a core component of the Chabura and everything it is that we stand for and we're looking to promote. Nevertheless, for the new attendees and new listeners, Rabbi Berdugo is Rosh Kolel of the Bal Harbor Kolel in Miami and founder of the Institute of Sephardic Halacha. He received semicha from Rabbi Eliyahu Ben Chaim, Rosh Yeshiva Mekor Chaim, and Rabbi Yochanan Moshe Zweig. He's currently working towards his Dayanut qualifications through Eretz Chemda and the Montefiore endowment. I think tonight's topic is about whether gezerot of Chazal can expire and become obsolete when the reason is no longer relevant. I think it's one of those topics that always pops up on our WhatsApp discussion groups and forums every few months. So it's about time we sort of address it head on, and I'm sure it won't be the last we hear about it. But I'm sure the shiur today will lay the groundwork and establish the facts and the different opinions for further study and discussion. Tonight's shiur should be for the refuah shlema of Rachel Kelly Bat Mesoda, who is undergoing surgery. And yeah, I think that's all for me now. Bechavod Rav, all yours. Looking forward.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Avi. So as you mentioned, yes, it's just going to be laying the groundwork for this extensive topic. This topic is extremely important because, as most of you know, nowadays, most of the things we do are derabanan. Of course, there are many mitzvot deoraita that we can fulfill every day. But if you were to actually make a chart of it on your daily life of what you're doing, even on Shabbat, during the day, tefillah, almost everything is on a rabbinical level. So it's very important to know, do we have to keep certain laws? Do we not have to keep certain laws? Why do we have to keep these laws? Rabbinical law is really the foundation of Judaism nowadays. So this topic, as you mentioned, is extremely, extremely important. And to begin off, we're just going to start off with what is the koach of the Beit Din. I'm sure this is fundamental to or already known to a lot of people here, but we'll just take a little dive at it. Beginning with the pasuk in Devarim, ve'asita al pi hadavar asher yagidu lecha min hamakom hahu asher yivchar Adonai, that Hashem picks, ve'shamarta la'asot kochel asher yirucha. So Hashem's telling us that on this certain place, min hamakom, which we know is Yerushalayim, which Hashem chose, we have to follow whatever the Hachamim teach us, the Sanhedrin. And of course, we can't deviate from it left or right. Okay. So there's an interesting background machloket between Harambam and Haramban regarding what is the isur of lo tasur. If we do not follow their rulings, there is an isur of deviating from their rules. So according to the Rambam in the Mishneh Torah, I'm not going to read everything inside. I'm just going to recap outside. The Beit Din in Yerushalayim, which is the Ikar Torah Shebal Peh, says in Sifrei Mitzvot, says the Rambam, is that V'yizhiranu yitbarach me'avor davar mikol ma shetikenu oto o gazru ve'amal tasur. So every single thing that the Hachamim did, whether it's takanot, gezerot, minhagim, we have to follow it. And if we do not follow it, there is an isur from the Torah. Let's see. So he even expounds in the Hilchot Mamrim, which is the famous place where the Rambam really codifies all these laws, and he writes down there, I should share my screen, Mechila, I'm sorry. Share screen. Okay, yes, so in the Hilchot Mamrim, here he says that this is regarding anything that the Hachamim right, using the different methods that the Hachamim received on how to doresh the Torah, how to expound the Torah, or things that they seem fitting in their eyes, or things that are sayag for the Torah, fences for the Torah that they made. All these things, gezerot, takanot, minhagim, all of these things are a positive mitzvah to follow them, and an isur if you do not follow these things. So interesting background. The Rambam, he only mentioned Beit Din Hagadol Shebirushalayim, right, which is specific on the pasuk talking about the makom in that place that we mentioned above. So the Sifri actually says, "Ve'asita al pi adavar asher yagidu lecha min hamakom hahu asher yibchar Hashem al hora'at Beit Din Hagadol Shebirushalayim hayivim mita." Somebody who's a zaken mamre, somebody who is a, how do they say, rebellious elder who goes against the Beit Din, of course he's chayav mita, but that only happens if he's going against a ruling from the Beit Din in Yerushalayim, in the Makom, and specifically in the Bet Midrash, the Lishkat HaGazit. Ve'en hayavim mita al horat Beit Din shebiyavne. But let's say once the Beit Din moved to Yavne, they wouldn't be chayav. So it's the Nosei Kelim on the Rambam, the Knesset Gedolah, they seem mashma also that the Rambam perhaps is holding this, that it's real, the official power of an Isur Deoraita to go against the Beit Din and the positive mitzvah following the Rabbanan is perhaps only in the Beit Din Hagadol in Yerushalayim, not anywhere else. And we know for many hundreds of years, the Beit Din were in Galut outside of Yerushalayim, outside of the Lishkat HaGazit. There's also, I brought in here the Maganit Taba, where he actually expounds upon this, saying that yes, it could be from the Rambam. It's only the Oraita, like we just mentioned, in the Hamakom Hahu, in that specific place. Anywhere else, you still have to follow them 100%, but you don't get that Isur. Okay, now the Ramban, he argues with the Rambam, and he says that it can't be that you're going to be chayav to follow them and get the mitzvah deoraita or the isur deoraita for everything that the rabbi said. He breaks it down to 3 different categories. Here he says the lo tasur only comes from things b'ma she'amru be'pirusha Torah, things that they are explaining the exact psukim in the Torah in a certain way. Then you get the isur deoraita if you don't follow them in those perushim, right? Using gezira shava, binyan av, and all the other 13 midot that the Torah is expounded upon. Fine. Or other things that it's the implications that they learn the Torah from the Torah, how they understand the Torah, that they're perush on the Torah. Those are things, or halacha leMoshe Sinai. Those are things which is a ikar Torah shebal peh. That's where you get a lo tasur if you don't follow them. However, gezerot and takanot that the Chachamim did later on, you do not get the isur of lo tasur. Rather, you just get, he says, samach be'alma. They use the lo tasur, but you don't really get the isur from the Torah. And then the third categories are things that the Chachamim enacted that they did, for example, but it's either Chachamim or the Nevi'im, which is Ner Hanukkah, Mikra Megillah, all these other mitzvot that don't really have any peshat in the Torah explicitly. So he says those ein lahem samech ela b'pasuk shel avicha v'yagid el zegenecha v'yamru lecha. Already, it's just it's a concept of following what our elders say, but not because of the din of lo tasur. So that's a little background on the different strengths of the Beit Din. Could be according to the Rambam, it's only mamash in Yerushalayim in the Beit HaMikdash. Everything else, it's not as strong, but of course it's still binding halachically. And according to the Ramban, it's limited to only certain things to get this isur, not all different takanot and minhagim, etc., that the Beit Din establishes. So now, what we really came here for today is regarding the concept of a bitul of takana. If the Chachamim were gozer something or mitaken something, do we still have to follow it? And before we get to even that, you have to understand that can another later Beit Din nullify or undo what the previous Beit Din has done? So with that, before we get to actually annulling completely, we have to get to, can you mebatel a decree that was done by our predecessors? So starts off in the Mishnah, in Ediyut, it says, why the Mishnah says, why is it that the Mishnah mentions an individual against the Rabbim, against multiple opinions? So the Mishnah says, is because perhaps the Beit Din, they decided to go to be posek like an individual over the Rabbim, and to tell us that another Beit Din cannot undo the pesaka that original Beit Din which was based off the Yahid, unless, this is fundamental, unless the later Beit Din is greater than them in wisdom and in numbers. We're going to see what does it mean to be greater in wisdom and numbers soon. The Rambam in Perush Mishnayot, he explains this, pretty much what I just said. And he tells us there, what does it mean, Gadol bechokhmah? He says, "V'gadol bechokhmah mimenu lomar shi'er rosh yeshivat zeh ha-beit din hacham me'oto shekadam." That the Beit Din has to be greater in chokhmah means the Av Beit Din, the Rosh Beit Din, the head of the Beit Din, he has to be wiser than the previous Av Beit Din. That's all you need. And later on, we're going to see what does it mean that the minyan as well, the numbers in quality and quantity, they have to be greater as well. So now, based off this Mishnah, the Rambam is posek in the Yad Hazakah in Hilchot Mamrim that he says, Beit Din shegazu gezerah tiknu takana v'nihu upashat davar b'chol Yisrael. So the Beit Din, they made a decree, and it spread amongst all of Am Yisrael, which is a very important factor for the takana to be binding, is that it actually spreads and takes effect everywhere. People are following the law. We'll see. Actually, we're not going to mention it, but if it doesn't take effect, then it's automatically null and void, that gezerah. So if it would spread, I'm going to skip to the bold. Right? A later Beit Din cannot undo it unless they're greater in wisdom and in number. And he says, this is critical for the class today. So even if the reason for why the Hachamim made this enactment, it is no longer valid anymore, it doesn't apply anymore. Nevertheless, the later Beit Din cannot undo it unless they are greater than them. And now the Rambam explains, how could it be that you have a later Beit Din greater than the previous Beit Din? Because halacha is every Beit Din has to be 71. Every Beit Din is 71 people, elders. So he says, right? So he's saying something interesting is that in order to be more in numbers, greater in numbers, is that every other Hachamim, all the other Hachamim around amongst Am Yisrael, they're on board with this gezerah. They agreed to this takana. So when you have a greater Av Beit Din in Chokhmah than the previous Av Beit Din, and on top of it, you have more Rabbanim on board with this new takana or undoing the takana, then the takana can be undone. So only with those two criteria, according to the Rambam, is the only way to undo a takana, a gezerah. Fine. And just background information, what's the difference between gezerah and takana? In short, I think based off Perush Mishnayot, is gezerah is something to prevent things from happening, and takana is in order to enable and to promote more mitzvot being done. And there's different, well, we don't have to get into that now, but that's just basically what a gezerah and takana is. So, comes in the Ra'avad. The Ra'avad, this is the famous Ra'avad attacking the Rambam, saying, how could it be? Why do you say that it has to be a greater Beit Din, has to undo the previous enactment? Could be even a smaller Beit Din, not as great. Why? And he brings a proof for this. He says, if you look at the case in Itur Shukei Yerushalayim, Beperot, so we're going to see what that means, but pretty much in Yerushalayim, they would take fruits and put it all around Yerushalayim to make it beautiful. He says that's a kasha, right? Because She'arishonim tiknu ve'Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai b'tela achar hurban, right? So that was the takana that you have to, we're going to see what it is soon, that you have to actually bring the Kerem Reva'i, the fourth year fruits, to Yerushalayim, so that the Yerushalayim will be beautiful, the marketplaces will look nice. However, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, he undid it, and this is crucial, after the Chorban Bet Midrash. And why? Because since the original reason was already nullified, therefore he undid it. And says the Ravad, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was not as great as the previous Av Beit Din. So says the Ravad, Rambam, I'm sorry, but you have a previous Beit Din that was much greater than a later Beit Din, and the later Beit Din undid it since the reason did not apply anymore. So just background information is that Kerem Reva'i, you have Orla for 3 years, and then on the fourth year, you would have to bring any produce to Yerushalayim, and it would be like maaser. You would eat it in Yerushalayim, and the Hachamim were mitaken that usually you could be poded. You can redeem your neta revi'i if you don't want to bring it to Yerushalayim. However, Hachamim said that if you live within the travel of 1 day to Yerushalayim, you can get to Yerushalayim within 1 day, and the Mishnah tells us exactly the borders for this. Then you would actually have to walk to Yerushalayim and eat it there. You cannot go and just redeem it as you would usually do. And the reason is, the Mishnah says, the Gemara says, in order to beautify Yerushalayim, the marketplace of Yerushalayim, with fruits. There's going to be fruits everywhere. Looks glorious. It's beautiful. So therefore, Hachamim said, you have to do it. You have to bring it to Yerushalayim. You can't take the easy way out and doing pidyon. And the Gemara brings a case to show that that was the proof, because Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, he annulled this takana. So the Kesef Mishnah, he comes to defend Rambam, as he usually does. Kesef Mishnah is Maran the Shulchan Aruch, Rav Yosef Cairo. So he says that the kasha of the Ra'avad, the question of the Ra'avad, is not so clear, because he wants to propose that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, even though he came later, he was actually better than the predecessors, the people who came before him, the Beit Din before him. And he says, though, but there's a question on this, because he says, Ve'im Tomar, if you want to say, we say Shemonim Talmidim Hayu Lo Hillel HaZaken. Hillel HaZaken had 80 Talmidim. And Gadol Shebekulan, who was the greatest of all of them? Yonatan ben Uziel. He was the greatest of all. Katan Shebekulan, the least of all these 80 Talmidim, was Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. He was the least of out of all these Talmidei Chachamim. So sounds like here that he wasn't as great as Hillel or all the other great people before. So says the Kesef Mishnah, this is his own chidush. He says, Dilma katan shebikulam lo bechokmat Torah kamar ela b'shar chokmatu. So he was smaller than them in other worldly knowledge, but not in Torah. In Torah, he was stronger, but not in other worldly knowledges. So, for example, he says, here's a proof, Teda, because we say that the Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, he knew all Mishelot Kovsin, it's the Nikudot, Mashelot Kovsin, Mashelot Shu'alim, Sichat Shedim, Sichat Malech HaSharet. He knew Maaseh Merkava. He knew so much Torah. He knew a lot of stuff. So for sure, he was probably super great and even better than the people who came before him. Right? Only in other Chokhmat. No, Mechila. Right, sorry, Mechila. So they're saying that that he knew a lot of stuff, but so they want to say in Chokhmot, in other Chokhmat he was not as good, but in Chokhmah of Torah he was just as great. So that's the Maran Bet Yosef, the Kesef Mishnah, trying to bring a proof, and the proof he brings, right, that he became the Nasi in place of Hillel. He took the position right after Hillel, and therefore must have been he was greater than all other 80 students of Hillel. That's a beautiful proof, seemingly, that he was great, and therefore there's no question. Ra'avad, you try to say that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was not as great, and therefore Beit Din later on can undo a previous Beit Din even if they're not as great. No, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was greater than the previous generation, and therefore there's no proof. However, thanks to Sefaria, I saw this Rabbi Yitzhak Nisim, and I know we're a big fan of him in the Habura. In his Shutin Hatov, he actually brings down a question on Kesef Mishnah. He says, if you look at the Bavli in two different places, it's very it's really hard to understand the Kesef Mishnah in this fashion, right? Because it's straight up seeming there in those different Gemara. They didn't bring it here, but he quotes them, that it's clear that he was not as great as them, even in Torah. And on top of it, he brings a even harder kasha on the Kesef Mishnah, is that he was not the one that came right after Hillel to be the Av Beit Din. You had Shimon the son of Hillel. Then you had Rabban Gamliel Zaken, Dor Shelishi Hillel. Then you had the Shimon the son of Gamliel, Rabbi Gamliel. And then you only in the last two you had between Rabban Gamliel Sheni and Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. Then Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai took the spot. So the kasha of the Kesef Mishnah, or the answer of the Kesef Mishnah, does not really work out, because he was not taken. He didn't take the seat right away. there were other people that were greater even than Yohanan ben Zakkai. So far we still have the Ravad as a good question. How do we answer this? So an answer for the Rambam is from the Lechem Mishnah. The Lechem Mishnah actually brings something beautiful, is that if you look at the Mishnah in Maaser Sheni, there it says, Misha, I'm going to read the quote. It's in the bolded part. Mishrabu aperot hitkinu shiyu nifdeh samuch lechoma. So even though we said there's a takana that you have to bring the fruits to Yerushalayim to make it beautiful, however, if there's so much fruits, then the Hachamim said, no, you don't have to bring it to Yerushalayim. You can do the pidyon outside for the neta revai. And he says, the Mishnah says, and the original takana that they did, they made a stipulation. They said they can return it back to the original decree whenever they want. So it says the Lechem Mishnah is that since the Keiman the takana haita rofefet, it was loose. It was sometimes you could do like this, sometimes you could do like that. So therefore, kal vachomer, when there's no more Beit HaMikdash and we're not bringing the fruits there anymore, for sure we can kind of jump onto that tanai that they made and therefore not have to bring the fruits to Revai, and therefore that's why Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai had the power to mivatel the takana of a previous generation, even though he was not as great, right? So therefore, according to this Mishnah, and the Lechem Mishnah is answering, the Rambam has a beautiful proof in the Ravad. After seeing this Mishnah, it's very hard to understand because really the Ravad he didn't bring it, but according to this Mishnah, we see the takana wasn't so strong because there was a tanai in this takana of the Hachamim. Okay, so far, the Ravad did not propose that if the Gezerah is no longer relevant, we do not have to follow it anymore. He's still saying, of course, we have to follow it. However, if you have a later Beit Din that's not as great as the previous Beit Din, they can undo it. So that's all he's saying so far. However, we're going to see even more radical views that there is a case where batel tam, batel Gezerah, and it's found all over the place. And today I'm not trying to find a solution or an answer that answers up why yes, why no, but together we'll see the different examples that I could collect in the past day and see if we can find maybe some common ground in order to why these type of takanot don't apply and other ones do apply. And the truth is, it's a cholent. It's not so clear. There's so many questions on why this and I want not that one, but we'll see together and let's see if anybody has thoughts, let me know. So I'm going to run through these examples. So number one, we have Yom Tov Sheni for a dead person. Really? So it says like this in the Gemara Betza, Yom Tov Sheni legabe emet, kechol shaviu Rabbanan. So on the second day of Yom Tov, which we know it's all the Rabbanan, the rabbi said, since Hem Amru, they said it's the Rabbanan, and they also said, but when a person dies, you can treat it as a regular mundane day. You can do whatever you want for the dead person. You want to cut the clothing for it, you want to cut the asa, the adasim for the dead person, which is something they would do back in the old days. You can do everything you want. However, says Amar Ravina, but nowadays that we have this evil Persian empire that will really persecute the Jewish people, Haishinan. We no longer allow you to do whatever you want on the second day of Yom Tov, because as Tosafot brings down Rashi, he says, because they're going to say, oh, you're doing work on Yom Tov Sheni, then you must do all work, even on regular Yom Tov. So therefore, Hachamim said, no, okay, forget about what we said. You're not allowed to do the work anymore. Even you're not allowed to take care of the dead person on the second day of Yom Tov. So, says Tosafot, V'hashta bizman hazeh she'en havrei mutar ve'en lomar shetzarich min rachel latiro. So Tosafot comes and he says, nowadays that we don't have these evil people coming and telling us, oh, if you're doing this, you have to do everything. So therefore, says Tosafot, since that doesn't apply anymore, therefore we can go back to the original law, and therefore we can take care of the dead people. And therefore, second day of Yom Tov is considered hol. We can do whatever we need for the dead person. And he says like this. He says, "The kevan dezeh hatam mishum hashasha ve'avra hashasha avaratam." Therefore, since the original reason was because of a certain concern, which was mishum dehabarayim, therefore they're not around anymore, these evil people. Therefore, once the concern is gone, therefore the reason is gone, and therefore we could be mekel. Ve'achenami amrin an gabe mayim migulin. This is important. We're going to talk about this later. is about the exposed water. As we know in Chazal, they made a decree that you're not allowed to drink from exposed waters or certain liquids because perhaps a snake put some poison into it and they're going to drink it, and it's dangerous. So now too, snakes were not the reason behind the snakes. It doesn't really apply nowadays, or the reason behind the Mayim Gilulim doesn't apply anymore because we live in certain areas, and therefore we don't have to keep that anymore. Right? He says, "She'en nechashim mitzuin benenu anu shotin mehen afilu lechatchila afal pi shu davar shebeminyan." This is crucial. He says, even though the isur of drinking exposed liquids was a davar shebeminyan, which means davar shebeminyan means it was something that the Bedin Agadol enacted, they made. Nevertheless, since we don't have snakes around us anymore, we live in nice areas in Europe without snakes, therefore, we don't have to follow that rule anymore. And so to here, the reason that the Hachamim said we're not allowed to do Yom Tov Sheni for the dead person doesn't apply anymore. Therefore, we don't have to be choshesh for what they said. Fine, that's one case. Now, nega beyayin. So now what about if a goy touches our wine? We know that from the Torah you have yain nesach. If a goy he libates our wine, it's prohibited from the Torah. And to do libation, it really just shikshuch. If they would shake it, that's already a libation. If it's an exposed wine and they shake it around, it's forbidden from the Torah. Then we have the Rabbanan of Stam Yinam. I'm not going to get into that, but whatever. It says the Tosafot. He says something very radical. Aval bizman hazeh, afilu meshachshech leka nisuch. Even if a goy, he shakes the wine, that would not be asur. He says, and he asks a question. V'im tomar kevan de gazu al nisuch ha'ovet kohavim havel edavar shebeminyan tesarich minyan achel hatiro. Right. So I think I'm learning it wrong, but I think according to shichshuch, according to everybody, is not asur. Only if it's actually mamash, they actually do a libation to the wine. But the Hachamim, they said that even shichshu, shaking the wine, is forbidden. And if the Tosafot says that, but shichshu, it's davar shebeminyan, Hachamim said it's asur to do it, and therefore how can we allow it? It says Yesh Romar, check this out. Yesh Romar, de lo gazru ela ala menachsechim. They only made this gezerah on people that actually do these things. That they do the shich, they're doing nisuch, they're doing libations of wine. Since nowadays nobody's doing this anymore, in Europe nobody's doing libations with wine, right? The most maybe the Pope would just take some wine and sprinkle it for whatever. That's all they're doing. So therefore we don't have to be hoshesh, and therefore it becomes mutar now, says the Baal Tosafot. And then he brings proof again. This is an interesting proof as well. The Rava Shadar Kurbana Lebar Sheshech Beyom Edo. There's another halacha. You're not allowed to do business with goyim on their holidays because perhaps they're going to go and thank their God, and you're causing a goy to do avodah zarah, to mention the name of his false god. So he says, however, since Rava, there's a case in the Gemara that Rava, he knew a certain goy, and he knew the goy was erlich goy. He was a good goy that regarding avodah zarah. So therefore he says, since I know this goy, he sent him a gift on a holiday for them, on one of the Yamim Tovim. He says, since I know de lo palach avodah kohavim, it's okay. And he says, Tosafot, doing business with goyim on their holidays is a davar shebeminyan. It's a takana from the Chachamim, or gezerah from the Chachamim. And look, he didn't need Rava in the Gemara. He didn't need another Beit Din to undo it. Why? Says Tosafot, is that sometimes, we see the Chachamim made a gezerah, but it didn't apply in all situations. On certain people it applied, on other people it didn't apply. So that's one step we're going to see, that we're going to revisit this case again. Okay, he asked a question about stam yinam. However, it's how can we allow stam yinam, drinking wine, right? The goy now, he did shichshuch to our wine. How can we allow it now? It's asur because of maybe we're going to come to marry their daughters. And that reason still applies nowadays, says the Tosafot. So therefore, I'm stuck in my problem. Maybe what I said is not good. So he says, so he says, no. The reason why by stam yinam they made it asur behana, right? Wine is prohibited more than other things because goyish wine, or wine that was libated, is because it's even asur b'hana'ah. You can't have any benefit from it. You can't sell it and make money off of it. Whereas opposed to their bread and their oil, originally was only asur, only for eating, for consumption, but not for selling. So he says, There it's different because there was more common. But nowadays, since the goyim, the people that do avodah zarah, they don't know how to do nisuch so well. Therefore, we're going to keep it. Let's keep it. Let's take it down a notch. Leave it at the level of bread and oil, or or like foods that goyim cooked, which is asur as well, the rabbanan. So he says we're just going to make it prohibited to drink, but not to have benefit from it. So again, this is a clear case that Tosafot says the reason doesn't apply. So therefore, you're allowed to do it, or it doesn't become prohibited to have hana'a from stamina. And he says, "Machmir tavu ala beracha." You want to be machmir, good for you, but you get a beracha. But that's not the halacha, right? The Rambam, regarding the sending gifts to goyim, he also, right? Everybody, I'm sure in the Chabura, we know Rambam is the famous guy, famous hacham, Mechila, that batel tam lo batel gezerah. We already read it before, but now interesting. The Rambam is posek off the Gemara that it's asur lishloach doron lekuti biyom edo. You're not allowed to send a goy. It's probably the version that's not filtered. How do you say it? That was okay, whatever. The
uncensored.
Censored. Thank you. It was the version that's good, but to goy biyom edo. He says, so yeah, it's true. It's asur. However, if you know that this goy doesn't believe in avodat kochavim, then you're allowed to send to him. So the Rambam also is making a qualification. Yes, there is a gezerah. However, it depends on the person. If you know the goy is a good goy, no problem. You can send it to him. Right, the Rosh, doing business with them as well. The Rosh, he says, right, the Rosh was pondered by the minhag, the custom, that how do we do business with all goyim? We pay their loan, we borrow money, we pay them money, etc. We buy stuff from them on their holidays. Right, so you see, he brings from the Rashbam in the name of Rashi. He says, since nowadays, since the goyim in his time, they do not do avodah zarah, therefore they're not going to go and thank their God on that day. Right? This is according to, of course, the shita that Christianity is not avodah zarah. Of course, we know Harambam and other poskim hold that it is avodah zarah. So, but this is according to the shita of Rashi, that since nowadays it's not like how they were back in Baghdad or in Iran or wherever the Hachamim were, where they were mamash doing avodah zarah. Nowadays they're just doing Christianity, and that's not considered avodah zarah nowadays. Fine. Right. So he says here, crucial, the Rosh, Alma mi'ikara lo hayta gezerah ela lefi hamekomot she'ovdim avodat kochavim sham. Dehade kamar Shemuel begole ein asur ela yom edam bilvad mishum de lo havu aduke kulei hay. Because back then, so he wants to say also that the reason why you're not allowed to do stuff with them on their Yom Edam is because they were still a little religious. However, but nowadays that we know that they're not religious at all, these goyim, they're not doing avodah zarah, therefore you could be mutar as well. So clear case again, the Rosh, part of that same school of Tosafot, they're saying batel tam, batel gezerah. The Odiyesh Lomar, I mean, you don't have to say that it's batel gezerah completely, rather they're just saying that it applies in a certain place and it doesn't apply in other places. They're not saying it's completely annulled, it doesn't apply everywhere. Okay, that's another answer. The Rivash says something interesting. He says, and he started Europe, Mishum de tehilat hatakana kach hayta le'esor u'lehatir lefi mehamekomot u'lefi ha'anashim. So he says again that the takana, the original takana, was dependent on certain places and certain people. So again, it's not just a gezerah, blanket statement that Hachamim made, and it's asur in every aspect. Rather, sometimes yes, sometimes no. And we see that's how Haram was posek. There was a gezerah, but the Hachamim gave us that ability to kind of see where this gezerah should apply and where should it not apply. Right? And we talked about this gilui, which is the water that's exposed, the liquids that are exposed. So it says that Tosafot on the Gemara in Yoma, Ela b'makom deish mishum gilui. Right? So he says that nowadays, he says, don't say it's a problem because it's a davar shebiminyan and we're mekel nowadays. He says no, because that was only done. They only made this original takana in a place where you have a problem with exposed liquids because the snakes can come and touch it. And he says, Right. Okay, let's continue. Fine. And the Gemara in Chulin, let's say, let's see. Oh, the Rambam. We go to the Rambam. The Rambam here, if people who are following 100% Rambam, he doesn't give any kulot. Sounds like here, you have to follow the halacha. And he says all the different liquids, and he doesn't give any exceptions to the rule. However, let's see Maran Shulchan Aruch, people who follow Shulchan Aruch, says the Shulchan Aruch, ve'achshav she'en nechashim mitzuyim benenu mutar. He says, he's going like the Tosafot. He says nowadays that nechashim, snakes, are not so common. Therefore, we are allowed to drink liquids that have been exposed. Right. So, I mean, there is what to say here regarding sakana, that perhaps there's different things. You can say batatam, but the gezerah, that applies by regular takanot and gezerot, but things mishum sakana, because of dangers, maybe not. But we already saw from the Tosafot that in the Rosh, they hold that no, it's the same takana. It doesn't matter why Chachamim did something, whether it's because of, to help Jewish religious observance or mishum sakana, it's still a davar shebiminyan. And who cares? If this is allowed, then we can apply this concept to other things as well. And that's what the Baalei Tosafot did. Whereas some want to make a difference. In Maran, sounds like there's no difference. Let's see. Mayim Maharonim. Everybody knows the reason why you have to do Mayim Maharonim is because there's two reasons, but the main reason we know is because of Melech Sedomit. They have a certain type of salt from Sedom that could be dangerous for people if they put it near their eyes, etc. So therefore, we have to wash. And Hachamim didn't make a beracha for it specifically because it's Mishum Sakana. And Maran, the Tosafot as well, he says, אבל לנו שאין מלח סדומית מצוי בינינו ואיננו רגילים לתורה אחר סעודה אין הנטילה מעכבת עלינו לברך, right? Yeah, so he says nowadays that melech sedomit is not around us, therefore we don't do mayim achronim, right? I think that's the Yeki custom. The Germans nowadays, they don't do mayim achronim. A lot of people as well, and I think in Moroccans the women don't do it, but the men do it because of Kabbalah, etc. But that's a big reason. And it says in Or Chaim Shulchan Aruch as well, he says yesh she'enu hagim litur mayim achronim. So the Maran brings that as an opinion. He brings as it's a Manda Amar that he says that some say you don't do mayim achronim nowadays. Fine. Shabbat. This is a very interesting halacha that Hachamim said that there's certain things that women are not allowed to go outside, men as well, but women, we're going to focus on the women part. They're not allowed to go on certain things because maybe they're going to go they're going to go and show all their friends, hey, look at my new this or look at that, and they're going to take it off and they're going to come to carry in the Shut Rabim. So it says Tosafot, he says in the name of Rabbeinu Sar Shalom that the davar shehu regilot leharot zo lazo asur. So only things that people show each other. Ukshe'enam regilot mutarot. Right, sorry, he says only women that are accustomed to show things off to other people, that's going to be a problem. However, women that are not noheg, are accustomed to show off their things to other people, he says, and our women nowadays, they're not so showy, and they don't show off their jewelry to each other. Therefore, it's going to be okay. Right, so again, there's a takana from the Hachamim. Women are not allowed to go with certain jewelry in their Reshut Rabim. But women do go nowadays, and one of the reasons is because it's Tosafot. He says nowadays women don't go and take it off and show off to other people, right? And this is something that I think everybody follows nowadays. The Maran and Shulchan Aruch, he brings it down. He says he brings different reasons why. Maybe perhaps nowadays he's trying to do a melamed zechut of why nowadays women are going out with their jewelry, even their shetels. Let's say, according to the Gemara too, they can go out with the shetel more than the hatzer. They can go to the Reshut Rabim with their shetel. Let's say. So he says is that because perhaps maybe there's no Reshut Rabim nowadays, right? This is a very controversial halakha. People want to learn from here that Maran held there's no Reshut Rabim. Others say no, it's just a melamed zechut. And then the Rama brings down what we just read is that nowadays women do not go and show off to each other, and therefore there's no reason to be concerned. Fine. So that's another example where takana is not being practiced because the reason does not apply anymore. Right. So now the Ritva on this halacha, he brings down these words in bold. Isur hu she'asur lefi azman. He held. Where did they get this from? It's hard to know exactly, but these are the Rishonim, the great Rishonim, saying that this gezerah was according to their time. The mitziut of the women, they were like this, and therefore they made this takana. But nowadays the women are not as showy; they don't do these type of things, so therefore it would not be a problem. Fine. Famous case, Rikud b'Shabbat, dancing on Shabbat, music on Shabbat, right? It's a Gemara, it's a 100% halacha from the Davar Shebiminyan, from the Beit Din Agadol. You're not allowed to clap and hit yourself and dance to make music on Shabbat. All these things you can't do. Mishneh Torah is posek 100% without any exceptions. Not allowed to do it. Tosafot says nowadays, very fascinating halacha. Guys, what's the reason why you're not allowed to do this? Says Rashi, right, the Rambam as well. Because perhaps Shema Yitaken Kli Shir, you're gonna actually, if you start making good beat and everybody starts dancing, your friend, somebody's gonna go and take out and make a drum or make some type of oud to start playing. Where's Ohadir? He's gonna start playing the oud, and therefore it's a problem. Sorry, Asaf. So says the Tosafot. So therefore nowadays, he says, nowadays, it's okay, we're allowed to dance and we're allowed to, hit our hands, slap our hands and make music and make beats, because the dafka biyamehen shayu biki'in la'asot kli shir shayach lemizar. Only in their days, it was actually, it was reasonable to make this gezerah because they knew how to make instruments. However, nowadays, nowadays nobody knows how to make these instruments, so therefore there's no reason to make this gezerah. So that's another example where Tosafot is saying explicitly, we don't have to follow the takana anymore because it doesn't apply at the moment. Fine. The Shulchan Aruch, he brings down he's posek like the Rambam. There's no exceptions. However, the Haggah, the Ramah, he does bring down the shita of Tosafot that it would be okay, and that's how a lot of Hasidim, etc., they're noheg. Even Sfaradim, they bring that on Simchat Torah, since we're dancing for the kavod of Torah, we're not going to forget, about the sur of making a kli. Therefore, it wouldn't be a problem as well. All these different kulot based off really of the tam doesn't apply in this situation, and therefore it's okay to dance, etc. Right? The big question is why is Maran sometimes he's holding like the Bale Tosafot shita, sometimes he's not. Even the Ramah, sometimes he brings in the shita, sometimes he doesn't. That's a separate question. Fine. Doing eruv with a goy, where really Hachami made a takana that if there's two Jews living in a courtyard and there's a goy neighbor, you have to actually rent from him the area, or you have to do something with him so that he can ruin your eruv. So you have to actually he can make it asur for you to carry in your hatzer. So he says, why is this? Why did Hachamim make the goy some manda amar? Why is he something here? He says, v'devar zeh gezerah shelo yashkinu ovid kochavim umazolot imahen shelo yilmedu mema'asav. Hachamim made this reason. Why? Because they don't want us to live next to the goyim, and therefore we're going to learn from their actions and their lifestyle. So Hachamim made this they made this asur on the goy asur on us in regarding the hatzer, so that we don't want to live next to goyim. So it says the Ginat Veradim, which is Sfardi posek from Egypt, very, very famous posek. He says something fascinating. Bizmanenu lo shayach hay ta'ama, kevan shekol takana na'asta le'archik. He says nowadays, us in Egypt, this gezerah doesn't apply, because since the whole reason was in order to remove us from the goyim, vekan belavachi. And since nowadays, even without this reason, we're already neighbors with goyim. We relax with them, we eat with them, we do everything with them. So therefore, there's no reason to have this gezerah. So that's another example where you even Sfari poskim, they're going with that same shita of batel tam. It's not batel tam, but the tam doesn't apply in this situation. We don't have to follow it anymore. The Hatam Sofer, believe it or not, the Ashkenazi Rav, he's saying no. He held on there. If you look at the Teshuvah, he's saying no. Well, you're not allowed to be mekel because it's a davar shebiminyan. So you have, it's all over the place here. Medicine on Shabbat. You're not allowed to have medicine on Shabbat. Why? Because this is a gezerah also, davar shebiminyan. Maybe you're gonna come shema yishok hasamananim. You're gonna come to grind herbs, and therefore that's an isur deoraita of grinding, and that's forbidden. Right? So if you look at some poskim, Rav Chaim Naah, the Tzitz Eliezer, they hold that nowadays, for example, since not the average Joe knows how to make medicine, and we don't have that old, alternative medicine that they used to use. Rather, we have, you have to get these special pills and Advil. Nobody knows how to make an Advil. Therefore, you could be mekel for pills, and the poskim use this as a snif lahakel. Many Sfardi poskim, everybody using this nowadays. So this is another thing where you see the time doesn't apply, and therefore we could be mekel in certain situations. Right, swimming on Shabbat. this is interesting, right? You're not allowed to swim on Shabbat. Why? Gezerah shema ya'aseh havit shel shayatin. You're going to come to make a boat. You're going to make a little craft boat out of some wood or float on, whatever, a very makeshift boat. Says the Noda Yehuda, says Yesh makom bezel lisfarat hatosafot. Perhaps since nowadays we don't know how to make these boats, we can be, there's room for what Tosafot says regarding all these other things that, dancing and everything. We don't know how to make instruments. So too by here as well. So he wants to propose, perhaps, yes, maybe in the end, he's not a clear heter, but he's using the svara as well. Now, another case for the Rambam, for the followers of the Rambam as well, it's a Gemara as well. The Gemara in Shabbat, it says, you are not mechabed to sweep your floor. It's forbidden on Shabbat, right? And it's mishum shevut. The Gemara says it's because it's a derabanan. Why? Maybe you're going to come to you're going to make the hole nice and even, and you're coming to fix your floor. You're doing Yisur on Shabbat. So he says, however, the Gemara says, in his city in Mehoza, he was actually sweeping the floor. He says, why? What's the time? What's the reason why the Hachamim made this gezerah? You're going to seal the holes in the floor. Wow, proof from the Gemara that nowadays in Mehoza, they had much higher standards of living, and they had nice marbled floor, no problem. Says Harambam, Posek Harambam, says Rambam, you're not allowed to do it, but if your floor is nice and smooth with it's marbled, tiled, therefore you're allowed to. So you see a case from the Rambam as well that he's posek like the Gemara that there's a gezerah, but if we know the time of the gezerah and it doesn't apply in this situation, we could be mekel. So it's very confusing the shita of the Rambam, because at the same time he says not batel, but at the same time here he's saying it is. Another case of the Rambam, the murias. This is a famous type of fish food that they used to have, and maybe add some vinegar. And back then, a lot of the vinegar was done with stam yenam, with wine from goyim. So the Mishnah in Avodah Zarah, it equates this isur, just here in the bold. It's one of the things that murias and givinot, even cheese, everybody knows, Rabbi Yonatan Halevi had a beautiful shir on givinat takum and the cheese from goyim. This is up there. Murias in the Mishnah, if you just read the Mishnah without any Gemara, murias, this type of dish, a fish dish, is forbidden because perhaps the goyim, they put some non-kosher vinegar into it. So the Hachamim, the Varshid B'Minyan, they said it's asur to have it, right? But the Gemara, it says, you open the Gemara, Tanu Rabbanan, murias uman mutar. If it's from an uman, it's okay. Which means if it's a goy that he, for whatever reason, here it brings the cases. The Gemara says for whatever reason they don't need to add the vinegar because the fish is not so fatty. It's more fatty when it's fresh. Forgot the case exactly what it was. Therefore, it's not a problem to buy from them. Harambam in the Mishnah Torah. So he brings down, of course, murias is asur. However, b'makom shedar kan letelot yayin asur. Only when they put wine in it. Vim haya hayayin yakar mina murias mutar. However, he gives an exception based on the Gemara as well, that if the wine is more expensive than murias, why would a goy want to put something more expensive in the murias? And therefore, it's going to be okay. And he says, this is a fascinating Rambam, that this is how we rule for everything. Anytime there's a chashash that the goy put something not kosher in, any takana, any gezerah that the Chamim said you have to be careful for, because maybe the goy put something that's not kosher, he says it's going to be okay in a case like this when the forbidden item is more expensive than the other item. Why? Because he says, a person, a goy, is not going to put the more expensive item in a cheaper item and therefore lose money. Right? But however, he would mix the cheaper with the more expensive in order to make profit. So therefore, you see the Rambam as well. He's posek that yes, murias is a davar shebiminyan. In the Mishnah, you just read it, they eat exactly like cheese, and it's going to be problematic. However, the Gemara gives different situations that we see the Amoraim, they were allowing certain murias based off the reason that the Hachamim gave. Right? By cheese as well. We didn't bring it here, but cheese as well. The Rambam, let's say, is posek. There's many different reasons why the Rambam is posek, because the Varshemami, they put a non-kosher rennet into the cheese, and therefore it becomes forbidden. So the Rambam brings down stam that only applies to cheese that's made with animal rennet. If it's made with vegetable rennet, then it should be okay because we know the reason. And really that makes sense with what he's saying here, the Rambam. We know the reason why. However, the Rambam does bring the Shitat Geonim. He says in the name of Miksat Geonim that since they made a gezerah, lo plug, we don't make a difference. It's not so clear what Maran holds. What the Rambam holds. Everybody wants to say that Rambam for sure goes like the Geonim. I have some proofs if you want. You can text me later privately why it's not so clear like that. But you see, there are these rules, these concepts where Hachamim gave us the reason. We know the reason, and therefore we can kind of manipulate it based off the reason. Behemat daka be'Eretz Yisrael. Another example. We have animals in Eretz Yisrael. You're not allowed to raise small animals, for example, like small goats and sheep, etc., in Eretz Yisrael. However, you're allowed to do it outside of Eretz Yisrael, etc. And the Mishnah Torah, he brings it down, halacha lemase, you're not allowed to do these things in Eretz Yisrael, right? And it's the reason it's asur, because they're going to come and do damage. Right? You're causing damage, which is even forbidden. So therefore, you're not allowed to do it. Shulchan Aruch, you open up Maran Shulchan Aruch, what does he say? That's halacha, but then he brings down ve'ha'idna she'en matzui shiu yisrael be'eretz Yisrael sadot v'nireh deshari. He says nowadays, in the time when Maran was living in Sfat, Jewish people don't have fields. They didn't own any fields. So therefore, it seems it's okay. So again, you see, Maran is posek, batel. The reason is no longer practiced or applicable. So therefore, we could be lenient in a certain way, right? There's actually a famous machloket behind this even nowadays. What about nowadays where the Jews took back Eretz Yisrael, right? Celebrating after Yom Ha'atzmaut. We have Eretz Yisrael now, and we Jews do have fields. So now do we have to be machmir? Or can you say, no, I follow Maran? So Maran, Rav Ovadia actually has a big machloket with this in Rav Pesach Sfi Frank, where Maran said, Rav Ovadia says, no, the gezerah was always there. It just didn't apply in this case, but now it applies. So therefore, we have to follow it. Where other poskim, Rav Frank was saying, no, we still don't have to follow this. We still can be mekel. Fine. Talit shel Pishtan, the Rosh came and he went to Sfarad and he was shocked how are people wearing tzitzit out of Pishtan. According to the Rosh, it's a whole machloket. They hold that you're not allowed to have tzitzit on Pishtan because maybe you're going to put techelet, and techelet has to be with wool, and therefore you can come to have sha'nez in certain situations, so it's not okay. However, he says, perhaps de lo shayich lidmuto ledavar shenesa bibinyan de ein lo heter ela al yedei beit din hagadol mimenu bechuma bibinyan de keven shetama yisur yadua im nitpardatam batela yisur mimela. So this is fundamental in the Shita de Rosh. He's saying it's a davar shebibinyan. However, since the reason is known, therefore, if the reason doesn't apply anymore, we could be lenient. So the Rosh now is saying something fascinating. When we know the reason of the gezerah of the Beit Din, we can actually manipulate it in certain situations. And since nowadays we don't have techelet, says the Rosh, okay, they can wear these tzitzit made out of linen. So fundamental shita of the Rosh. This, okay, good stuff now. Halachot of the Me'en Sheva. We know on Motzei Shabbat, sorry if you guys don't mind a couple more minutes, a couple more minutes. So the beracha of Me'en Sheva. After Shabbat, Hachamim were mitaken, on Shabbat night, after we do the Amidah, we have another mini Amidah called the Me'en Sheva, which is a little concise form of the regular Shemonah or the Amidah that we do. Says the Tur, he says, in the name of the Bala Yitur, in the name of Rabbeinu Nisim, Shekeshahal b'Shabbat ein omer beracha me'en sheva shenitkana b'shvil ha'me'achirim b'Beit Knesset. Sorry, because the people that are delayed in the Beit Knesset, shelo zikum, so they don't get damaged. Ve'ayina ein sarich delil shimurim. Sorry. So he says on Pesach night. Try to remember what you guys did this year because it happened this year. Friday night was on Pesach. Pesach was Friday night. Shabbat fell on Pesach. And did you guys do the Me'en Sheva? So according to the Tur and the Shulchan Aruch, we're going to see it's posek like this. The En Omrim B'Ikat Me'en Sheva. So Maran Shulchan Aruch, he says, since Pesach is the night Lel Shimurim, we're guarded from any bad things from happening to us. And the only reason why we have to do Me'en Sheva was because people would come late to shul. And if they come late, they're going to have to go back home by themselves very late. And maybe shedim or other types of things are going to come and harm them. Or let's say, Lefi the Rambam, ganavim, thieves, etc., are going to come and hurt them and harm them. So therefore, how you don't have to sit on Pesach night because we're guarded. Hashem protects us on that night. So according to Maran, you see again, Batel Tam, this was a takana. You have to do Me'en Sheva. but since it doesn't apply on Lel Pesach, you don't have to do it anymore. Maran also is posek. I didn't bring it here, but in a Bet Knesset of mourners, in a house of mourners, when you go to their house, you don't do the main sheva as well, because it was only metaken in a real Bet Knesset. Let's say if you're doing a minyan, you're just doing a Friday night minyan in your house. According to Maran, you don't do the main sheva because they only made the takana in the Bet Knesset. That could be different because maybe that actually is the rule. They only made it in the Bet Knesset and on other places as well. But however, on Pesach night, he says, since we're protected on that night, we don't have to do it. So the Rambam, famous Teshuvah, says Rambam with the Hazara nowadays. Right nowadays, everybody knows how to pray. The only reason why Hachamim were mitaken to do the Hazarat Hashatz is because perhaps people didn't know how to pray. And therefore, he says, nowadays everybody knows how to pray, so therefore perhaps we don't have to do the Hazarat Hashatz anymore. Says no. And people wanted, the person asking him said, maybe it's a beracha levatala, because since everybody knows how to pray, and the Shliach Sibur is doing the whole the Hazara, and nobody needs to do it, it's a beracha levatala. So he says no. Even though nobody is using the reason behind what Hachamim were metaken, which means everybody knows how to pray. Just like they made the Kiddush in Bet Knesset. Right? There's another halacha from the Gemara. We don't do it nowadays. I don't think, maybe Spanish, Portuguese do it, I don't know. But Friday night, you're supposed to do Kiddush in the Bet Knesset because of the guests that are there. There used to be guests staying in the Bet Knesset. There was a special room for them. And therefore, you have to do Kiddush at nighttime as well for them. And he says as well, and just like they did the Hazarat at Tifilat Ma'ariv Bel Shabbat, we have to do the Me'en Sheva, which we mentioned before, because of the people that come late to Shul, to Bet Knesset. And he says, V'nit Hayev Zet Tamid. All these things I just told you, the three things, you're going to be obligated to do them constantly. Because why? Afilu ein sham mi shelo haya sham betchila. Even if there was nobody there originally, you still have to do it. Right, which means for the main sheva, Mechila, the main sheva, that you only have to do it for the people who come late. You don't have to do it even if there was nobody who came late. That's what he's saying. V'chen kol ma shetiknu misibat davar kazeh en inyano ad shetiyeh sham asiba la'asot asher b'habura nikan ela inyano sheyaseh zot bechol ofen. Says the Rambam, you have to do it constantly, always, no matter what, even if the reason doesn't apply. Why? This is fundamental. We're going to see soon for Rav Yosef Mishash. Shema tiyeh sham asiba mechayvet la'asoto. Perhaps one in the near future, sometime or even now, there could be a situation where the original reason does apply. Says the Rambam, you have to follow all the reasons. You have to do everything that they said, even if it doesn't apply, because perhaps the reason is it's going to actually apply. There's going to be a situation where you're in, it's going to have to apply again. Another tissue of the Rambam, they asked the Rambam, the Magen Avot, the main Sheva that we do after the Amidah. He says, nowadays, why do we do it? Somebody asked him again, why do we do it? Nobody is staying in the Bet Knesset anymore, nobody's coming late to the Bet Knesset anymore, and therefore it could be a beracha levatala. So he says the Rambam, this is very interesting. Ein ra'ui lebatala me'acha shepashat minhag minhaga berov Yisrael. We shouldn't undo the minhag, this takana, because it already was accepted amongst all Jewish people. V'im nitbatela yavo ledei machloket. Right? If we're going to undo it, there's going to be a machloket. So here the Rambam sounds like technically you could, but because we don't want a machloket to happen, therefore we do not promote undoing this concept. Shulchan Aruch, he's posek. Interesting. We said the Rambam holds you have to do kiddush every Friday night. You have a Rambam shul Bet Knesset Friday night. You must do kiddush in the Bet Knesset even if there's no orchim. Shulchan Aruch is posek. I'm just going to underline here, highlight it. Aval yoter tov le'anhig shelo lekadesh bebet knesset. He held better not to do the kiddush in the Bet Knesset. Rav Yosef Mishash. Rav Yosef Mishash has a fascinating teshuvah. This is a famous motive that he has throughout all his teshuvot about batel tam, batel gezerah. And here they ask him about, do we have to do Hazara nowadays? So he says, if you look very well in the teshuvah of the Rambam, he says, Shema, he has a different girsah. He says, Gezerah Shema yesham oto adavash nitkana bishvilo. The same words that we highlighted above. Perhaps Shema tiyeh shama siba mechayvet le'asodan. Perhaps there's going to be another situation that comes up where you're going to have to do it. So he says, so it says, Rabbi Yosef Meshash, you see that according to Rambam, you only have to follow things where there is a chance where it can happen, where the original reason is still effective. אבל אחד ידוע בבירור שבשום אופן לא יהיה ולא יבוא הדבר שנתקנה התקנה בשבילו, ודאי דאחרינא לה לתקנתה אחד דנפיק מינה אפילו נידו לאיסור. He says, if we know for sure that original reason is not going to apply anymore, you do not have to do it anymore. Then we say batel tam, batel gezerah. Right? And he brings a beautiful proof Maran in the Shulchan Aruch, because Maran Shulchan Aruch, he just said regarding the Kiddush in Bet Knesset, since nowadays nobody is going to the Bet Knesset anymore or sleeping in the Bet Knesset at nighttime. Therefore, Maran said you don't have to do it. So he wants to say that in Maran's time, it was different than the Rambam's time, because in the Maran's time, that's it. People had guest house just for them. Nobody ever sleeps in Bet Knesset anymore because they have hotels and they have Bate Knesset. They have guest house. So therefore, Maran was posek, batel tam, batel gezerah. So therefore, he says, therefore, batel tam, batel takana in this case as well. So therefore, you do not have to do the kiddush on Friday night in the Beit Knesset. However, regarding tefillah, אבל הטעם שנתקע עליו חזרת התפילה היה עדיין במקומו עומד שהיו נמצאים במקומות שהיו בהם שאינם בקיאים. However, for tefillah, in the time of Maran, there were still people that were not so fluent in it, and therefore he was posek that you have to do the Hazarat Hashatz. However, if you read the Teshuvah of the Rambam of Rabbi Yosef Meshash, he brings for many reasons nowadays why it doesn't apply. Even the Hazara, nobody needs to do it anymore. Nobody, we don't have to do the Hazarat Hashatz anymore. He's actually posek in his Knesset, in his community. There's no Hazarat Hashatz because nowadays either everybody knows how to pray, or you have Sidurim, you have other things that you have, and therefore you don't need to have the concept of Hazarat Hashatz. So when I was looking at this, it's surprising because you think Rabbi Yosef Meshash is like, it's only Rabbi Yosef Meshash. But then I found this Teshuvah of Avraham Arbel, where he's one of the main Talmidim of Rav Ovadia Yosef. And he actually is posek. He says, we shouldn't do it nowadays. Everybody knows the tefillah. And even if there are some people that aren't bikiin, it's a miuta de miuta. It's such a small amount, and therefore it's already batel. And therefore we say, batel takana. And therefore you only in that shul, in the place where you have people that don't know, let's say pretty much in like a kiruv bet knesset, then you could do the hazara. In other places, no. So, and then also he brings down below here, and same thing, me'en sheva, says Rav Avraham Arbel, he says, perhaps nowadays too, we should do the me'en sheva. He's actually saying, it's posek, imken yesh lebatla, we should actually stop doing the me'en sheva. So this concept is not only unique to Rav Yosef Meshash. So there's a Rav Moshe here that I brought down, it's a little interesting. He says that, okay, B'kitzu, I'll just say it. He says that if we have a gezerah, but since all the hachamim know that we can't keep it anymore, therefore it's as if it's not poshet anymore, and it's as if all the hachamim in a generation are mevatel that type of that gezerah, and therefore it becomes okay. And that's regarding the singing or the clapping and making music on Shabbat, etc. He uses this as a very interesting stif lakel. It's hard to read. It's in the Rambam and other shitot, but that is a mandamar. Of course, it's Rav Moshe Feinstein. Fine, we'll end here. So B'kitzur, you see that you have, it's not pashut. It's like Avi said, we're just laying the groundwork for this, and these are just basics. There's so many different shitot. Seemingly, I think Hamovadi Yosef, the Pri Chadash as well, they do hold that Maran Shulchan Aruch is posek batel tam, batel gezerah. Again, we don't mean batel tam completely or batel gezerah completely. It doesn't apply in certain situations, and perhaps the Rambam could hold like that as well, even though he says even if the time is batel, we do not stop keeping it. However, we saw many cases from the Gemara that the gezerah only applied in certain situations, so therefore the Rambam would apply that as well. And then we have the shit that Rabbi Yosef Meshash is that once from the Teshuvah of the Rambam, you saw it clearly, and he brings the Rambam as a proof, is that once the reason doesn't apply at all, then it is batel. Only when there is a concern where it may still apply, you no longer, so you still have to follow that takana or gezerah. But if it's completely nullified, which means there's no reason for that gezerah anymore, then even Rav Yosef Mishash says that you don't have to follow that takana or gezerah anymore. Hazaku Baruch.
Hazaku Baruch. Thank you, Rav. That was unbelievable. Definitely a resource. Hopefully, you can share the source sheet with us, and we can keep going back to it. Do you have time for questions?
Sure.
Anyone wants to raise their hand or just unmute? Ben, would you like to go?
Yeah, sorry. Chacham, thank you very much. I apologize, it might be a bit of a long-winded question. But I was trying to think of some kind of paradigm or some kind of reason where you can get kind of an idea that a gezira can be limited to the context in which it's given. So I was thinking of the idea of a gezira only being forbidden kama aseh shahaya, like with the case of the Safina and Bayarden, and specifically a gezira is limited to its context. So the first part of the question is there room to say that therefore all gezirot are limited to very specific circumstances, and from there you can get possibly some kind of precedent to say it from the Gemara itself, to say that in a place where there are no, let's say, nechashim, then mayim guluyim is no longer an issue. That's like the first part of that. And the second is within the opinion of Harambam, it seems to be, just from what I've seen, that there are times where he is posek only kama aseh shaya, and times where he is posek to include other cases as well as that. So for example, he talks about that case specifically with the Safina and the kazayat of a dead body that was inside the boat. So there he extends it to all the other cases, not kama aseh shayas. He says you can't throw it from one side to the other, you can't pass them across the water, even not in a boat. But there are other cases where he talks about, for example, carrying if you're carrying one of the durabanan, that if you're carrying a chavit of kodesh in one hand and then midras tuma in the other, then he says that is asur, but only kama aseh shaya. So within the opinion of Harambam, what's his working theory in terms of whether you are posek kama aseh shaya or not?
It's a good question. I know those maseh shaya, that's straight from the Gemara, so he's posek like the Gemara. But as we saw here, that the Gemara sometimes gives Amoraim that were being mekel because they knew the tam of the gezerah. It seems like could be like maybe there's no real machloket, that even he agrees with the Rosh, and that if we know the tam right away, then the Chachamim can actually apply that reasoning. However, things that are not, there are many, the post can bring down many cases that still apply no matter what. For example, doing avodah, working on Erev Pesach, that Chachamim say you're not supposed to do, you're not allowed to do. So the post can bring down that still does apply nowadays. So therefore, I don't know. I wish I could give you a clear case. If you want, let's be in touch, and we can. I would love to see. I know it sounds like you are very knowledgeable, and you can give me a lot of more cases as well. But we can work on those together one-on-one. But I wish I had more clarity as well. Mechila.
Thank you.
No,
Gary.
Right. Yeah. Thanks for you. That was a really interesting show. Lots of cases there. Having studied particularly a lot of this of the heter, and one of the things that came out, I don't want to go back into the whole cheese thing because I know that we've covered this, but when it comes to cheese, there's certain positions that the position is, if you look at Rav Magid on the position of Rambam, the clarity is that this is always Devane Sam B'Minyan, right? And these are some things we don't. So there's a clear chiluk between that opinion and the opinion of Rabbeinu Tam on the issue that's lenient in this case. So I suppose the question is, I know that it's very difficult to navigate when you repeal a gezerah for the instances of lo shekiach, it's something is not present there, or a matsui is quite often used. I remember I was looking at Shadnez and looking, because it was in last week's parasha, and then looking at Shulchan Aruch, and quite clearly there's a Baha'idna from the Rosh on the basis of, these days we don't worry about the gezerah of using silk because it looks like linen and so on and so forth. I suppose the question I'm asking is, when we're strict on something, is it simply because Maran is posek that way and it carries through, so we have all these kind of issues with, particularly with cheese, because that's a very interesting one. because clearly cheese could be couched in the entire narrative of we no longer make cheese with the rennet of that's used for avodah zarah. So then why then apply that to cases where we know for a fact, even when you can see that the cheese is made with a coagulant which is from a vegetarian source, but it's clearly evident to you that that's the case, why would we still be osir? And the reason is, at least the Rambam says that kol gvinot, so then lo plug, as you said in your shiur actually.
Right.
So I guess, how do you navigate this? How do you navigate that sometimes it's possible because a matsui or lo shikiach or whatever it is, are there any kind of implementation that one can use to repeal this stuff? You clearly have to be very careful. So
Yeah.
how would you posit an answer to that? And I know that's a very difficult question.
Yeah, you guys are getting me today. Oh my gosh. I think I should just hang up. That's Avi end. No, yeah, listen, I mean, that's why I brought that was, the Murias, which was in the same Mishnah of the Gevina. You see, the Rambam straight up is telling you that it's okay, and the Gemara is telling you straight up it's okay in certain situations. And by Gevina as well, the Gemara says, if it's Mishum this, then if Mishum Nechashim or whatever, the Nikur, then it's going to be okay because, you can age the cheese, and we have a Mesorah, that cheese that's aged is not a problem. So the Rambam, I personally believe, I wrote a response on it. I have to send it to Sina, I think, because I heard in London is a big thing with the cheeses there. So I personally think that Haraman was not going with the Miksat Geonim, and he was posek that it's really okay. It's only vegetable, mamash with animal rennet is okay, and for sure microbial rennet and all these things would be okay as well. But it's very hard to navigate, and it's very dangerous. I'm only comfortable speaking with Habura about these things because this is how conservative Judaism probably starts. You're using all these things and just being mekel left and right. But you see here, there's presidents from all these, these are all Rishonim, Maran Shulchan Aruch as well. They're all using these things as being mekel. I don't have an answer why Maran is, how to navigate, like you said, how to navigate why Maran sometimes is mekel, sometimes is not mekel. And I was reading in the past day of different teshuvot, and be'emet, everybody's lost. Nobody really knows the answer. It's very confusing. I don't know. Rav Yosef Meshash is the only one that tells you straight up, but he is pretty much saying now everything becomes okay. Stam Yenam is okay. He even goes so far to say Eruv Hatzerot. Nowadays, since Shlomo HaMelech said, the whole reason of Eruv is because of maybe you're going to come to carry their Shut Rabim. He goes so far to say now in Morocco, he did it in Milam Zehut. He saw people carrying outside and Shut Rabim, nobody cared. He says nowadays, since we don't have Shut Rabim, so therefore the whole gezerah of Shlomo HaMelech doesn't apply anymore. But gezerah, he went that far to go that far. It doesn't apply at all. He brings down also by Stam Yenam. He allows machia, how do you say, arak, that they would put wine in it. He allowed it because he said also there's no avodah zarah nowadays. Lots of these things as well. But it's tough. It's very tough. I hear.
Thank you.
Yeah, very good.
Okay, a question. I realized a lot of the examples given, they stem from Tosafot, or then afterwards they're quoting the Svara of Tosafot, right? If we look at sort of pre-Tosafot, is there a pattern or trend there? For example, what do the Geonim say about sort of Batel Tam, Batel Gezerah? Because it seems from then on, then even Maran, it seems, is using it quite frequently, and it doesn't seem to be a clear pattern, as you've said. But I'm asking, because the examples of Rambam, they seem to be quoting the Gemara. When the Gemara qualifies it, then he seems comfortable to qualify it. But so I'm trying to understand, is there sort of a pattern there?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's true because Maran is really, he is from the school of the Balei Tosfot as well. He's a mix of everybody. So he has that Rambam there, he has that Balei Tosfot, and he is using the Balei Tosfot. So yeah, right. For nowadays, the people that follow the Shulchan Aruch, they would go with that approach, and that's for sure Rav Yosef Mishash is going with. But Rav Yosef Mishash did bring a proof, the Rambam, from that one teshuvah we have. I didn't do enough studies in it, but I would love if anybody can find any teshuvot of the Rambam or any teshuvot of the Geonim that have any implications about these things. That would be great. I mean, I know, like for even the Yemen, they didn't accept certain gezerot as well. I think they were always mekel with patakum. Rav Kappa has a few things that they were very mekel with. I'm not sure the reasons. I have to go through it again. But yeah, I don't have enough experience in seeing stuff what the Geonim did. The only thing I saw was from the tissue of the Rambam, but I know there's two sides of the Rambam. You have the Rambam in the Yad Hazakah, and then you have the Rambam in the Teshuvot. And in the Teshuvot, he has much, a little more flexible in certain things. So it could be there we can find some more things. So together, B'ezrat Hashem, we should find more examples and definitely study into this much more. You're right. What we're saying mostly is definitely the Bale Tosafot and Rosh, and as Rafael would say, the anti-Maimonidean poskim there. So we don't know about the other side. We have to find more about. There's definitely sarich iyun. More research is needed in the side of the Rambam. That's a very good question. So far, I think I'm 0 for 3, right? Okay, good.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I think there's no more questions. And for Wednesday, looking forward to Wednesday, we have Professor Tzvi Langerman. We're talking about Yemen. I think that will be focusing on the Chachamim of Yemen, and who's an expert in this field. So I'm sure that will be very exciting, and it's a privilege to hear from him. Rabbi, we look forward to having you again, as always. And I think this will spark a lot of discussion, I'm sure, in the groups. Yeah, let's keep the conversation going. Everybody, feel free to ask questions on the Discord or on the WhatsApp, and get in touch if you're not on the WhatsApp discussions and you want to be. And we look forward to seeing you all on Wednesday. Thank you, Chacham. Thank you, everybody, for joining. It was great questions, and see you then.
Yeah.
Have a lovely day.
Gary has a question, or the hand is up? No. Okay, no more.
No, sorry.
Alrighty.